Now, the South African Special Risk Insurance Association, or SASRIA as it's commonly known, recently released a documentary, Unveiling the Unrest, 7 Days of Destruction. It delved into the events of the July 2021 unrest, later known as the July riots. SASRIA paid out over 32 billion rand in claims related to damages and looting during that unrest. And let's unpack it with the association's Muzi Dladla, who joins us in studio to find out if they are more prepared should another incident of this nature take place. Thank you very much for joining us in studio. And a compelling documentary indeed. Reflecting on what happened back in 2021, what would you say are some of the defences that SASRIA has now developed to preempt and to perhaps protect the organisation from claims of the magnitude that you had to pay out?
Thank you for having me. We've obviously had to look at what didn't work and what worked. So part of the defenses that we even talk about in the documentary, the first one is looking at the clients themselves. They have a certain responsibility to protect to a certain degree. The second one is the taxi industry, for an example, the community. So pretty much everybody who gets involved outside of the individual client. And then the police as well as the army. So those are generally the 4 levels of defense. So the third one, which is the police, according to the report of the panel of experts, highlighted that there were delays, so there could be improvement in that. So we've created a model where we're using data, policyholder data, we're using other information like business intelligence. We are collaborating between the state as well as the private community to put together level of intelligence that could help us in enhancing those defenses. So I think that's one of the things that we're doing now. And if you take that and superimpose it onto the event, it actually shows that more than 50% of the claims could potentially have been saved if those defenses were actually working the way that they're supposed to be working.
Yeah, I mean, could South Africa or SASRIA in any instance survive another looting of this experience? I mean, we look at it, and you actually wrote a piece which I've just finished reading, actually reflecting on what happened, and the explanation given by the accounts of those who were there indicating that it seemed as though it was a well-coordinated event that took place, and the fear of the security personnel that were there in those moments. And so one wonders, could South Africa survive another incident of this nature?
South Africa, I think, as a whole, should not or cannot survive such if it were to happen again. And I think that is why the documentary, first of all, is there to raise awareness, to show who the biggest losers are, as you would have seen in the documentary itself. The community members, particularly the ones who were involved in this, on hindsight, when we go back and talk to them, there is an element of remorse, I would say, one. And then secondly, there are other things that we looked at. If you look at this one, it's slightly different from all other protests that we've had before. 1976 had a face, and there was a very coordinated type of an event that took place. So this one was not coordinated, it didn't have a face. So there was a lot of de-evaluation in respect of how it actually happened. So now that we know what happened and how it happened and how it got out of hand, I think the levels of defense models that we're putting together with the level of awareness, as well as making sure that the people who get involved understand how it's going to affect them, I think that is one way to drive us into a direction where everybody involved, because you are ensuring, for us as SASRIA, we're ensuring behavior of individuals who are disgruntled. So it's a very difficult thing to do. So getting them to understand the impact and how we could help maybe as a society to get together maybe ways of putting them in a position where they don't actually have to do that. I think that's some of the things that we've looked at. But to answer you directly, we cannot be able to do that again, because you know what happened at that time. We had quite a lot of money in reserves, as well as we actually had more than 3 times the required amount in terms of keeping reserves as an insurance company. But even then, it wasn't enough. So it shows that what happened is unprecedented and it should not happen again.
But of course there has to be scenario planning to see should something of this nature happen again. And is there a risk of it happening again, despite the fact that it should not be happening, when you look at scenarios and planning around that? I mean, we did speak to the organisation SASRIA earlier on, a few months ago actually, and there were fears around widespread protests fearing a national blackout. So it might not necessarily be that issue, but the risk of unrest remains nonetheless.
Yeah, true. And that's why we exist as a SASRIA. We exist to ensure that we take care of that level of risk. And as things stand right now, there is the potential that, if there could be a blackout, although we know with all the evidence and information that is out there, it is very unlikely because we have load shedding that prevents the excess demand from reaching the capacity. So managing that means that you don't actually get to that position. That's the one. And then the other one is that I think the individuals who get involved in that, when you're already sitting in a position where you are already struggling, destroying more property, particularly in areas where you are, I think maybe what I can say is the communities, one thing that really worked, the police maybe and the army responding a little bit later than maybe what would have expected, but what really worked is the communities themselves.
Yes.
Right? The communities, they started protecting their own property. And what we're doing now, we're taking advantage of that. So we're signing MOUs with various communities, we're engaging them, we use our CSI, and we've invited the private sector, particularly the insurance companies, to join us in that. So what we say, for instance, is we're going to build community centers, and we're going to get the youth, because it is majority the youth that was involved in this, try to help them, to find ways of being part of the industry, being part of the economy, and the taxi industry as well. They saved a lot the minute they realized that if the mall burns and they are unable to take people to the mall and back, then it means there's no revenue for them. So all of those things, we are putting them together into some type of a structure and a model that works, because the communities are the ones who protest. If we engage them, then there will be no incentive to actually protest at the end of the day, because you saw some of the interviews we've had there. The individuals, some of them who protested, they said they did it because the next person was doing it.
Yeah.
They didn't have an understanding of what was happening at that particular time.
But with those components that you've just described, it's also important then to understand the psychology of a protester. Yes. How would you describe that?
Yeah, very good question. So we've actually gone back. We are doing another article that talks exactly to the psychology of the protester. So we go back to prior 1976 to 1976 all the way to 94, all the way to now, and highlighting what is it that is different about the July 2021. Because we go back, we use various theories that underpin the psychology. For instance, relative deprivation is what had been driving the protesters all the time, because individuals gathered together, all the various communities, the various races getting together that were deprived. They got together and they were fighting towards. So their fighting was not necessarily to destroy, but to drive a particular goal, which is inclusivity, right? Getting included. And then all the way to now to 2021. So there has been a culture of that, but July 2021 is centered around the theory of de-individuation. So what that means is that there is no coordination, there is no drive, there are no people who are actually behind this whole thing. It is various parties with various motives, and the individuals who are doing this don't have any accountability. They don't take any accountability because they don't put themselves as the individuals who are doing this, because when you do that as an individual who has a conscience, there's a part of you that doesn't want to do that, because you are destroying something you know you shouldn't be destroying. So we will be publishing it shortly. It explains exactly the whole thing up to 2021. And the more important thing is, so what? What are we doing then about that thereafter?
Yeah, we have run out of time, but I have to ask you said you're engaging communities, making them understand how to be a part of their ecosystem, whether it's the economy and, related value chains. But what about the municipalities and government at a larger level, the engagement around that, making them understand that we need to work together as a government organization, but as a provincial and national leadership to make sure that the message trickles down to those community members?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. So I'll start from the municipalities. So the community engagements, we're doing them through municipalities, because the municipalities have got a certain responsibility to communities. So if we're coming in to help the municipalities in creating structures like community centers and things like that, it makes it easier to engage the communities. But more importantly, I'm sure you saw what happened in March this year when there was a protest. Within a day, there was visibility of the army. So we are talking to the state, and we've highlighted the state is aware of where the gaps have been, and the state is responding in that respect as well.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is the partnership between the private sector, particularly in intelligence. There's a lot of intelligence in the private sector, and the state has intelligence. So bringing it together and actually getting to mobilize it, I think, is what we are putting together as we speak.
Very interesting conversation, and thank you very much for joining us in studio. That is SASRIA's Muzi Dladla joining us to speak about that documentary you watched just about an hour ago on the July 2021 unrest, and really just the devastation that it caused in different parts of KZN and of course the rest of the country.